be able to travel to Seoul, South Korea this past May. And I'd also like to thank everybody over in Global Perspectives office, studies area, and also my colleagues in the Art History Division who made my trip possible as well. Most of you already know who he is, but I'd like to introduce you to my husband, Sunny, who I dragged along with me on the trip, and you'll see him in some of the pictures, so I wanted to introduce him to you now. All right, so I have never been to Seoul before May, neither had Sunny. It was our first trip to that region in May, and Seoul is a country, or South Korea is a country, the capital of which is Seoul, nestled in between the very important presences of national concerns of China and Japan, who have influenced its own culture and history in the last centuries. Now, my area of study is India, and so I am not that familiar with the deep history of Korean culture and Seoul, the Seoul art scene itself. So I was really pleased to have a chance to travel to the city and experience and witness some of the arts infrastructure that has emerged there in the last 20 years firsthand. I was able to meet with several artists and curators who are active in the global contemporary scene right now. So just a few landmark dates that might make some aspects of my slideshow today a little bit more clear. After some centuries, this is just an encapsulated history, after some centuries of single dynastic rule known as the Joseon dynasty, the 20th century proved to be a very turbulent period for Korea, starting with almost 50 years of harsh colonial rule under Japan, and then interrupted by World War II, and then its own Korean War, which ended in 1953, with the division of the peninsula into two nations, the communist North and the capitalist South. From 1960s onwards, we see not only in Asia, but especially in South Korea, an incredible economic boom, sometimes referred to as the miracle on the Han River, which is the river that runs through Seoul. So an incredible increase in the standard of living, the lifestyles, quality of life, and just general economy. Right now, Korea is one of the 10 largest economies in the world. In the late 80s, a period of democratic rule finally began, ushered in by their participation in hosting in the Olympics, a sure marker, of course, of admission into the International Club of Nations. When you look at the peninsula close up, you can see the division between north and south. This green line is the marker in the center near the 38th parallel, is the marker of the demilitarized zone, or DMZ, which is now one of the most fortified borders on the planet, keeping North and South Koreans apart from one another. This division has been the source of great tension for the last decades, last half century. And you'll notice the proximity of Seoul, South Korea's capital, to this demilitarized zone. So my first awareness of Korea came when I was an adolescent, and I heard stories by my father, who, as a captain in the U.S. Air Force, had been stationed very near the demilitarized zone, monitoring activity on and near the border. And he told stories of incredible hardship and poverty for Korean peoples in the aftermath of the war, as seen, for instance, now fixed in a diorama, a museum diorama, which is in the War Memorial of Korea, showing that kind of hard-scrabble life that they endured for several decades. You can see it also here in documentary photos of the period. This one shows women scrambling for food in the rubble of Seoul in the aftermath of the war. So when I began teaching contemporary Asian art course about 4 years ago, I started to include then famous Korean artists in my lineup of material. And so intellectually I knew, of course, that Korea had advanced beyond this level of rubble and ruin in post-war state. But still, it was nonetheless a kind of shock to actually visit the city in person for the first time and experience firsthand that level of sort of urbanness at a scale that I hadn't experienced personally before. I've lived in London and Los Angeles for many years, and still I was blown away by the high-tech glitz and glamour of Seoul. It's a very...
Is this picture taken from a building or a mountain or an airplane?
Well, technically this picture was taken from the internet. So it's a good question. It's not one. This is one of the few that's not my pictures in the slideshow. I believe it must be an aerial shot because you can see in the distance the highest structure in Seoul, which is the Namsan Tower. So here I believe this is an aerial shot, probably taken from a plane or a helicopter. But it gives you a good overview of the tremendous skyline of the city, which seems to extend for miles and miles into the distance. So those of you who know me know that I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Los Angeles, which is the city I lived in for 8 years before coming to Alfred. There's been so many great things about Los Angeles for me, but I really hated the traffic, I really hated the dysfunction and the corruption, I really hated a lot of things about that city. And so when I came back from Seoul, what occurred to me, when people said, well, what was it like? And I said, Seoul is the city that Los Angeles wants to be when it grows up. Right? So Seoul to me meant everything that a city should be in terms of a functioning urban hive filled with millions of people. And in fact, Seoul is now denoted a megacity, one of the megacities of the world. It's an enormous urban conurbation with a population of some 25 million people. That is about half of the population of South Korea. So half of the nation lives in the city of Seoul and its metropolitan area. So my theme, art old and new in Seoul, emerged in part from a continual exposure to the sometimes odd juxtapositions of old and so-called old and new, or traditional and contemporary culture in the city itself. Sometimes this happened to very amusing effect. So for instance, at one point, one of the reasons I went in May was to be there during the festivities surrounding the Buddha's birthday, which occurred at the end of the month. We arrived on May 8th. And so the whole month saw a buildup of activities and events and displays towards this holiday occasion. And so when you enter one of the important temples right in the heart of the city, you're greeted by a large float, a temporary float that's lit up at night with the Buddha atop of it, welcoming you into the peaceful compound of the complex. But in a very amusing kind of face-off, the Buddha is facing the Coex Mall, which is the largest shopping center in all of Asia. So I found it very ironic that we have here the Buddha, whose teachings encourage non-attachment and renunciation of material goods, here in a kind of face down with this contemporary temple of material acquisition. This mall and this temple are located in the neighborhood of Gangnam, which has been brought to international fame thanks to the video that I was playing in the beginning before the slideshow by a Korean pop star called Psy, and his understated hit has become an international phenomenon. He's now appearing on international news media channels. And how many of you have seen this video already? Okay, a handful. I think all of my students have seen this video and are very familiar with his antics. So this is the world's introduction to the already huge phenomenon of Korean pop music, also called K-pop. So, but I'm going to be talking more about the art scene in Seoul itself and its heritage as well, historical culture. So the temple complexes, of which there are many, and I visited several, are important spaces of retreat, peace, and calm in an incredibly busy and bustling city And it was not uncommon to see people rush in their business clothes and briefcases and come and meditate for 15 or 20 minutes in the temples before they gathered their belongings and rushed back outside. So it seems to me that it's woven into the daily fabric. These spaces are woven into the daily fabric of people's lives. And they're beautiful spaces with some ancient structures on them as well. Very interesting scenario, which I am trying to learn more about. Buddhism arrived in Korea sometime in the 4th century, and so there has a long presence in the Korean landscape, along with Confucianism and more recently Christianity, the 3 major religious beliefs practiced in Korea today. So in the build-up to the highlight of Buddha's birthday on May 28th, we saw an increase of activity in the temples themselves. So they became more hectic and noisy in their own right, as they were festooned with lanterns that feature labels from donors indicating the high level of local lay patronage to the temples themselves. In the daytime, there would be dedication services and prayers and chanting attended by hundreds of people. And by nighttime, the atmosphere became far more festive with the addition of food and music, and the lanterns lit up at night. Totally changed the environment inside the temple in a really positive way. This culminated with a parade and a lantern display with hundreds of colored lanterns throughout the city, larger than life size, some of them very elaborate installations appearing almost like stained glass, really beautiful, beautiful constructions. In terms of the old culture in Seoul, the landscape of heritage in Seoul, probably the most important anchor to this scenario would be its 5 palace complexes, the largest of which is the Gyeongbokgung Palace, right in the heart of Seoul. It's a huge labyrinthine complex of buildings, and this whole area was begun in the Joseon dynasty in the late 14th century. What's fascinating about it is that it's a huge tourist draw, not only for foreign tourists like myself and Sunny, but also Korean tourists. So for instance, we were lucky enough to attend an important concert of traditional music, which was not simply the playing of music, but the reenactment of a big imperial feast, complete with hundreds of musicians and courtesans and other courtly figures in traditional Korean costume, and also playing traditional Korean musical instruments. And so what's fascinating about this is that most of the audience was indeed Korean. There were a few tourists like ourselves who just happened upon the space, but many people had planned their day around this event. And it was very striking to me when a Korean friend of mine, Jin Hee, she was born in the early 70s, and she describes growing up in the 70s and 80s as having zero sense at all of Korean history in her education as she was growing up. And so the recuperation of history and heritage in the Korean education system is actually a relatively new phenomenon, and it is now being pushed with gusto in the school system and through the arts landscape of Seoul and other parts of the city, of the country. We can see this popularity reflected in the proliferation, for instance, of TV serials that focus on the Joseon dynasty period. For instance, this one is very popular, apparently a super steamy melodrama focusing on a Joseon artist. It's called Portrait of a Beauty. I'm still searching for a version of this on YouTube that has English subtitles. I haven't found it yet. So this enthusiasm extends not only to the within the palace compounds, but to how they spill out into the streets themselves, with people, Korean people, taking part in for instance, the 3 times a day changing of the guard at another one of the smaller palaces in the city of Seoul, complete with drum beating, the exchange of passwords and costumes. Children are also involved in the changing of the guard ceremony. It's a way of enlisting Korean people and their enthusiasm for this recuperation of their heritage. And so what emerged as a big surprise to me was the fact that these buildings, which originate originally from the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, are actually all built in the last 20 years. And this was because most of the palace complexes were destroyed during the period of colonialism in the first half of the 20th century. And so in 1989, the Korean government decided it was time to rebuild these structures. And so all of the palace structures have been rebuilt since this time. The process is not complete. And so you go on one side of the Gyeongbokgung Palace, and you'll see a large construction site complete with cranes and workers. So the process is ongoing. It's actually a 40-year initiative, but they're doing it with tremendous care, taking very special care to highlight the authentic architectural details, from stone masonry, tile work, woodwork, down to every detail from top to bottom of the buildings. So it was quite a shock to first learn that what I'm looking at are not 14th century palaces, but in a way 20th and 21st century palaces that are replicating this authentic Korean heritage. But the Korean audiences are lapping it up. The enthusiasm is tremendous. So of course, an important part of any culture, and Korean is no exception to this, is food. And on the palace complexes, there's a heritage village, which features smaller vernacular structures, including an authentic Korean kitchen, where the typical Korean housewife would be making important foodstuffs, such as that most ubiquitous of Korean foodstuffs, kimchi. Kimchi is a pickle or a fermented condiment that is made mainly from cabbage, fish paste, chili peppers, and salt. And often, traditionally, this would be put in jars in special arrangements and then fermented in the ground in the jar over a period of a year or more, depending on the region and the recipe and the haste with which you needed, the urgency with which you needed this important condiment. So it's so important to the Korean diet and cuisine that it actually merits its own museum. So there's a Kimchi Museum located in the COEX Mall with several floors dedicated entirely to the history, the importance of kimchi, how it's made, how it's sold, how it's stored, including how it's done today. So they have dioramas there featuring housewives creating kimchi, following their own seasonal or regional recipe. So it's incredibly, the food, kimchi, has an incredible variety to it that I never would have guessed. I had previously only ever seen kimchi in a supermarket in Los Angeles, in Koreatown, but apparently they have summer kimchi and winter kimchi, they have mountain kimchi, they have coastal kimchi, and so the stuff is ubiquitous. So if this is kimchi of the old days, this is kimchi today. Now you can stop into any supermarket and check out their kimchi bar, which has a wide variety of such of the pickle. In fact, the whole foodscape of Seoul is an amazing phenomenon to behold. We were both constantly in shock at just imagining the logistics of feeding a hungry 25 million people several times a day, snacking and 3 meals a day and so forth. And so the foodscape that you see there takes many different forms. An enormous workforce has to be catered to throughout the work week, which includes weekend days as well. And so you see, for instance, food trucks, food alleys and basements, food market stalls, and whole food streets They were called food streets. Sunny and I were lucky enough to be staying near Itaewon Food Street, an important international center of food. So we enjoyed pizza and pasta in addition to our Korean meals. Here you can see a Jongno Food Street. This is a food street catering to an important commercial district downtown in an older part of Seoul. So here we see densely packed together multi-storied buildings with restaurants on every single floor, snack shops, coffee shops, Korean barbecue, and other international food offerings, all available, open from early in the morning for breakfast until late at night after the bars close. So it's just an imagining the undertaking of feeding the city of Seoul throughout the day was really a daunting, sometimes overwhelming experience. Technology has impacted the food industry as well. So just like you can in supermarkets in the United States, you can find your food wrapped in plastic. And one amazing innovation is the ability you can now pick your own hydroponically grown organic salad greens in this installation in the Loteria supermarket, one of the biggest supermarkets in the world. We spent several hours there. Technology also looms large in the distribution of water. We had been told several times that we probably shouldn't drink Seoul tap water, though we did without any ill effect. But a ubiquitous feature of canteens and cafeterias and other public spaces is the water purification machine. And it's not only just a water fountain, but normally you can find some sterilized cups in a cabinet nearby. They've been sterilized with UV light, enabling you to enjoy a clean cup of cold or hot water. So this is a typical view of how technology has interpenetrated down to the individual level in Korean lives. Probably the most quiet subway rides I have ever enjoyed in my life, because everybody is utterly absorbed by their cell phone. Most Koreans own Samsung telephones, of course, Samsung being one of the major conglomerates driving or fueling the economic boom in the last 30-odd, 40 years. But sometimes you would even see people with two cell phones. They're talking on one and they have the other on the lap. That was not an uncommon sight. The subway system itself is an incredible technological marvel, a brand new system. The statistics are daunting, apparently handling 2.4 billion passenger journeys per year. So it's the world's second largest metro system after Tokyo. And it is utterly punctual, absolutely clean, totally efficient, and it's very easy to navigate for foreign tourists because all the instructions and place names are in both Korean, Hangul script, and also in English. So it was a pleasure to get around the city in very timely fashion. This is exactly what I meant when I said Seoul is the city that Los Angeles wants to be when it grows up. Right? Those of you who have experienced the Los Angeles Metro will know exactly what I mean. Possibly one of the more unsettling aspects of being in Seoul was an ever-present undercurrent of tension about the possibility of terrorist attack or an attack from their northern neighbors in North Korea. And so a very understated way of seeing that was on the metro system, each station has at every corner a cabinet full of gas masks with visual instructions on how to put the gas mask on in the event of an emergency. So here we see lessons having been learned from the mid-90s attack of the sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway. But again, another concern is the neighbors up north, that is the North Korean government with whom South Korea has endured regular confrontations and incidents over the past few decades. So this anxiety over the possibility of some kind of attack has generated an extraordinary level of preparedness amongst the Korean citizenry generally, but especially the Korean military. Seoul and Korea generally is a heavily militarized place with mandatory service required of Korean men, for instance. Women are not required, but they are a part of the military forces as well. And this is made very concrete in the arts landscape, in particular at the museum, the War Memorial of Korea, which is a multi-storied, multi-building, large complex that is primarily dedicated to the war dead from the Korean War. And it also memorializes not only the Korean war dead, but also the American war dead. However, it's not dedicated only to the heroes and the events of that war, but it also serves as an important space for basically recruitment and propagandizing the key role of the South Korean military in keeping South Koreans safe. I would imagine this is a subject of some controversy, and it's an area that I'd like to investigate more as part of my interest in museum studies and using the material for my museum studies classes. So, for instance, they had numerous displays. This one, it says the Republic of Korea Armed Forces defending and protecting Korea's citizens. Right? So many displays were devoted to this kind of message, highlighting, therefore, not only the past, memorializing the war dead in the past, but also the importance of the military in the present, and even a hypothetical future. So a display, for instance, focuses on the hypothetical scenario of a 1 megaton nuclear device being detonated in the center of Seoul. So it has a display indicating probable fatalities and a video animating the possible horror and destruction of such an attack on Korea, on South Korea. So North Korea is a nuclear power as well, and this has added to not only tensions between the two nations, but of course has added to the attention required or paid by the rest of the international community. So the Korean Peninsula has become an important center of global relations, one of the important centers of global relations. So the art world, if we now shift over finally to Art Nu in Seoul, South Korea, the art world also has responded to this kind of threat with a variety of treatments of this tension and militarization in their work, and the idea of a divided North and South. So for instance, the Korean artist Ham Kyung-ga, she designed some very carefully embroidered silk tapestries, but rather than doing it herself, she cut up her design and had it sent to North Korea through agents in China, where they were made, constructed, embroidered by master seamstresses in North Korean workshops. These separate pieces were then sent back to South Korea, where she had her own workshop piece together the tapestry into the recognizable image of the iconic atomic bomb mushroom clouds from World War II. These, of course, are the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, but whose nuclear legacy certainly retains an impact and a resonance in the Korean Peninsula. And so by doing so, she managed to use her conceptual art piece to cross that boundary between, that impermeable boundary between North and South Korea. She managed to finagle her way around it with her conceptual embroidery piece. Now, Seoul has had a very small but vital art scene for many decades now, since the 1960s. And this has been a continual presence increasingly on the international stage, thanks to important video artists such as the Korean Namjoon Paik, and more recently video installation artist Kim Soo-ja, and installation artist Oh In-hwan. These are all artists I have included in my own courses on contemporary Asian art. So I was really glad to be able to go and see this landscape of art and arts infrastructure firsthand when I was there. My goal was to see several important exhibitions that were happening in May, and one of them was at the Museum of Contemporary Art. where there took place a show entitled Dansekwa, which means monochrome painting. This is probably the most important modern art movement in Korean 20th century arts history. This is a time when we see artists working to develop a typically Korean sense of art and production, but at the same time synthesizing this indigenous practice with foreign outside influences. So specific influences might include the New York Color Field Painting School, the French School Art Informel, and other minimalist and abstract painting movements from the West. What the monochrome artists did was attach to it a philosophy of art practice and meditative mark making that they developed into a more Korean type of style, often in monochrome colors, hence the title. So what looks like a very plain panel of red paint, in fact, when you look up, get close to it, you can see that it's an incredibly intricately textured panel made of paper and paint that has a three-dimensional surface to it. It's like a quarter-inch thick surface that changes as you move from side to side in the piece. It's impossible to reproduce or to convey that very well here, and I've been reliant upon such reproductions for years now, teaching these courses with reproductions like this in books. So I was really happy to be able to experience this work and even meet a few of the artists who might maybe in the future enable me to bring such work closer to Alfred. So students at Alfred could experience this in person. And so what this amounts to, or what this is resulting from really, is from a push in the 1990s to build an arts industrial complex in Seoul. And so the benefits of that initiative are being reaped now in the shape of renewed interest in the modern period, an incredibly active current contemporary display scene as well with contemporary artists. And this is spilling over into the international sphere. And so recently, for instance, one of the Dansekwa artists, who was also part of the Monoha group in Japan, the artist Lee Ufan, Korean-born, he recently had a full retrospective show at the Guggenheim Gallery in New York City. So the intense interest on an international and local scale on these Korean artists and these earlier Korean movements has been really interesting to see. Another exhibition that I really wanted to check out was the first solo show in Korea by the Seoul-born artist Seo Do-ho. He's probably the rock star of Korean contemporary art right now, enjoying several solo shows globally in the last few years. He's been featured on television documentaries, and you can find much more on the artist on YouTube and online. He's a very plugged-in contemporary artist. But he made his name by creating these huge ethereal constructions stitched very carefully together from silk, fine silk fabric in a very quintessentially Korean color of celadon. Now he's moved into other colors, but his first piece was a celadon ghostly recreation or reimagining of his childhood home, which had been built by hand by his father. So here he's recreating that ethereal home in order to keep it with him, as he describes it, in his nomadic life across the globe. Currently, he is based in 3 cities, mega cities of the world, Seoul, Los Angeles, and New York. And so he describes the development of this idea as the part of the desire to be able to, as it were, fit his home in his pocket. So this idea of nomadism in the artist and the increased artist mobility has sparked a response in the international viewer as well. So we see hence his popularity across the globe. And his craftsmanship is incredibly detailed. This is an example of traditional Korean architecture in the nearby suburb of Bokchon village, where these kinds of heritage techniques are kept alive, and he's replicated that in his stitchery down to the smallest little architectural detail, hinges and wood lattice work and so forth. Meanwhile, he's also done it in replicating his Los Angeles apartments and his New York walk-up dwelling as well, down to the smallest little hardware pieces. So this show took place in another important museum in Seoul, and that is the newly built Samsung Museum. By its name, you can tell its main patron is the Samsung Corporation, and one of the many important donor families and conglomerates in the city. And this is a privately run museum, but it very firmly asserts Korea's presence in a cosmopolitan stance. It's designed by 3 European architects, including the Frenchman Jean Nouvel and the Dutch architect Rem Koolhaas. And in the buildings, in the different wings, you see Korean traditional art sitting side by side with American, European, and global and Korean contemporary and modern art, all sitting, coexisting comfortably side by side. So part of a very cosmopolitan awareness by the local Korean art scene of their place in the world. Again, part of a huge explosion of arts infrastructure. We see a proliferation of galleries, the expansion and creation of new art history and studio art programs throughout the country of South Korea. I have colleagues that I attended school with in LA who are now founding brand new art history departments in other cities in the peninsula. In addition, we see an immense number of curatorial initiatives taking place. Korea is also the site of the important biennale, the Gwangju Biennale, which is happening as we speak right now in South Korea. So this is all an important part of if we believe that art has an important role to play in a kind of humane future for an ever more crowded world, I think a lot of people, including myself, see Seoul as a possible model for arts management and the creation of a cultural scene that offers a lot of promise and vitality and sustainability. This view of sustainability and looking towards the future, I think, is very well explained in one particular urban planning project that has been enacted in the last 10 years or so in Seoul, and that is this space here. This is an elevated highway that was used to cover a stream, an important stream that travels very near the palace complexes. And following the war, this had become an open sewer lined with slums. So it was seen as great progress in the 1970s when the river was just covered over and turned into an elevated expressway for automobiles. But by the 1980s, this had turned into a total gridlocked traffic jam, spewing pollution into the downtown area, ruining buildings and disrupting pedestrian traffic and so forth. It was deemed as an eyesore. And so in a moment of enlightened urban planning, beginning in the early 90s, that highway was dismantled and has been reconstructed to incorporate a restored stream, which had originally dried up with all the traffic and trash. So that's been restored into an amazingly vibrant public pedestrian space. It's now a sunken parkway, some 5 miles long, snaking through the city. So although it's bisecting the city, it does so in an incredibly approachable and human-scale way. And it's also become an important center for arts installations. So at night they have projections of digital art on the side walls, and it was also a key site for the festivities in the run-up to the Buddha's birthday. So it's this kind of initiative that I think serves as a really good model for cities like Los Angeles that have a few lessons to learn, I think, about how to accommodate arts and culture in a really crowded and congested urban environment. So I'm really, really pleased to have had the chance to go experience this landscape of art, old and new, in Seoul, and I really look forward to a chance to return to this great city. Thank you.